He cheated while I was in labor, 9 words that rewrote my entire life in a single, brutal sentence. I found out not through whispers or suspicions, but with a message that arrived just as I was holding my newborn for the first time. There was no time to process, no space to grieve. I was a mother and a woman betrayed, all in the same breath. The hospital room felt smaller, the air heavier, as I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, but refusing to let go of my child. I remember thinking, this is the moment everything changes. And I was right. For months, I moved through each day on autopilot, my body present, but my mind replaying that night over and over. I fed my baby, changed diapers, learned to function on 2 hours of sleep, all while the betrayal gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. People said I was strong, that I was doing well, but they didn't see the cracks beneath the surface. I kept my pain private, locking it away behind polite smiles and brief conversations. There was no room for self-pity, only survival. His absence became a routine. He visited sometimes, bringing gifts and apologies, but the words felt empty. Our friends and family tried to bridge the gap, offering help, advice, and sometimes silence. I learned to accept their presence without explanation, grateful for the distraction, but unwilling to share the full weight of my heartbreak. The baby became my anchor, the one thing that made sense in a world that suddenly did end. Single quotes T.as the weeks turned into months, I realized I had a choice: remain trapped in the story he wrote for me, or start writing my own. I began to reclaim small pieces of myself, one decision at a time. I signed up for an online course, something I'd always wanted to do but never found the courage for. I started running again, not to escape but to remember what it felt like to move forward. Each step was a reminder that I was more than what happened to me. The transformation was slow, almost invisible at first. My reflection changed, not just in appearance, but in the way I carried myself. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never heal me. I stopped explaining myself to people who only wanted gossip. I started saying no, setting boundaries, and protecting the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could build something new from the ruins. 9 months passed. The invitation to the family dinner arrived unexpectedly, handwritten and formal, as if pretending nothing had happened could erase the past. I stared at the envelope for hours, weighing the risks and rewards. Part of me wanted to decline, to avoid the questions and the stares. But another part, the part that had survived sleepless nights and silent tears, wanted to be seen not as the woman who was cheated on, but as someone unrecognizable, someone stronger. I made my decision. I would go, not for him or for them, but for myself. I chose my outfit carefully, not to impress, but to feel comfortable in my own skin. I practiced what I would say, rehearsed my smile, and reminded myself that I owed no one an explanation. The night before the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized. She looked tired, yes, but also determined. She had survived the worst and was still standing. As I closed my eyes, I promised myself that this dinner would not be about revenge or validation. It would be about closure, about showing up as the person I had become. The past could not be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And for the first time in months, I felt ready to face it. The next day, as I prepared to leave, my heart pounded with a mix of fear and anticipation. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, but I also knew I was not the same woman who had walked into that hospital room 9 months ago. I was unrecognizable, not just to them, but to myself, and that was the beginning of everything. The moment I stepped out of the car, a hush seemed to fall over the driveway. I could feel eyes on me from the living room window, silhouettes shifting behind curtains, curiosity sharpening the air. My grip tightened on the small gift bag I brought, not because I wanted to impress, but because it felt like a shield. I took a breath, steady and deliberate, and walked toward the front door, each step a silent declaration that I belonged here, on my own terms. Inside, the familiar hum of family chatter filled the hallway. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the distant sound of a child's footsteps. Life had gone on without me, but tonight, I was no longer a ghost at the edge of their world. The door opened before I could knock. His mother stood there, her eyes widening in surprise before she masked it with a practiced smile. "You look wonderful," she said, her words careful, as if testing the temperature of the room. I thanked her, my voice calm, and stepped inside. The warmth of the house was overwhelming, not just from the heating but from the press of memories, holidays, birthdays, the first time I'd met everyone. I saw him across the room, his back straightening as he realized I was there. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something regret, maybe, or disbelief. But I didn't let myself linger in that space. I was here for myself, not for him. I moved through the room, greeting faces that were both familiar and distant. Some hugged me tightly, their words soft and supportive. Others offered only polite nods, their questions hanging in the air, unspoken but heavy. I could feel the weight of their curiosity, the urge to ask what had happened, how I was doing, if I had forgiven him. I answered only what I chose to, careful not to let anyone into close. This was my boundary, and I would not let it be crossed. Dinner was served, the table crowded with dishes and conversation. I sat between his aunt and my own sister, their presence grounding me. The baby, now crawling and babbling, was passed around the table, delighting everyone with her laughter. I watched her, a reminder of the life I had built from the wreckage. She was my proof that something beautiful could survive even the harshest storms. The meal unfolded in wave stories, jokes, moments of silence that stretched a little too long. I noticed how he watched me, searching for the woman he once knew. But I was not her anymore. I joined the conversation, shared a story from my course, laughed at a memory, and listened as others spoke. I was present, fully, for the first time. In months. At one point, his father raised a toast, his voice steady. To new beginnings, he said, looking at me. I met his gaze, nodding in acknowledgement. The words lingered, echoing in my mind. New beginnings. That was what this night was about, not revenge, not closure for him, but a quiet, powerful step forward for me. As the evening wore on, I felt a shift. The tension that had gripped me when I arrived began to loosen, replaced by a sense of quiet pride. I had faced them all, answered their questions, and held my ground. I was not defined by what had happened to me, but by how I chose to move forward. When dessert was served, I excused myself, stepping outside for a moment of air. The night was cool, the sky clear. I looked up, feeling the weight of the evening lift from my shoulders. I had survived the hardest part, not the betrayal, not the months alone, but the act of showing up, of being seen as I truly was. Inside, laughter drifted through the open window. I listened, letting the sound wash over me. I realized then that I was no longer waiting for someone to save me or explain away the pain. I was here, in this moment, because I had chosen to be. And that choice, more than anything, was the beginning of my freedom. I returned to the table, my head held high. The conversation resumed, lighter now, as if everyone sensed the change. I caught my ex's eye across the room. He looked away first. For the first time, I understood the power of letting go, not for him, but for myself. The past was behind me. Tonight, I had reclaimed my place at the table, and with it, a piece of my future. The questions started quietly, woven into the background noise of clinking glasses and casual conversation. At first, they were harmless, polite inquiries about my work, the baby's milestones, how I was adjusting to everything. But beneath the surface, I could sense the real curiosity simmering, the urge to understand what had changed in me and why I seemed so different. I answered with honesty, but only as much as I wanted to reveal. My boundaries were clear, and for the first time, I felt no guilt in protecting them. My ex tried to approach, hesitating near the doorway as if waiting for permission to cross the invisible line that now separated our lives. I saw the uncertainty in his eyes, the discomfort of not knowing how to address the distance between us. He finally spoke, voice low so only I could hear. You look different, happier, maybe. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. I am, I replied, letting the truth settle between us. There was nothing left to explain. The old dynamic me, seeking his approval, him holding all the answers, was gone. The family, sensing the shift, adjusted around us. Conversations moved on, laughter returned, and the evening's energy grew lighter. My daughter crawled into my lap, her small hands grasping my fingers, grounding me in the present. I realized how much I had changed, not just in appearance, but in the way I carried myself. I no longer needed validation from anyone in that room. My worth was no longer tied to their opinions or his apologies. As the night continued, I found myself drawn into a conversation with his cousin, who had always been kind but distant. She shared her own story of heartbreak, of rebuilding after loss, and for the first time, I felt a genuine connection. We spoke openly, without judgment or pity, and I realized how powerful it was to be truly seen by someone who understood. It wasn't about comparing pain or trading stories of survival, it was about recognizing the quiet strength that comes from moving forward, even when it feels impossible. Later, I stepped away from the table, needing a moment to breathe. I found myself in the hallway, staring at the family photos that line the walls. Each image told a story: holidays, celebrations, moments frozen in time. I saw myself in some of them, smiling beside him, unaware of what was to come. I didn't feel anger or regret, just a quiet acceptance. Those memories were part of my story, but they did not define me. He joined me in the hallway, his presence tentative. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy with years of unspoken pain. I nodded, acknowledging the apology but not letting it anchor me to the past. "I know," I replied, "but I'm not here for that. I'm here for me." He seemed to understand, stepping back and giving me space. It was the first time I felt truly free from the weight of his choices. Returning to the dining room, I noticed the atmosphere had shifted. The family was more relaxed, conversations flowing easily, laughter filling the spaces where tension once lived. I realized that by showing up, by refusing to hide or shrink, I had changed the narrative not just for myself, but for everyone in that room. They saw me as I was now, resilient, unbreakable, and entirely my own. As the evening drew to a close, I helped clear the table, sharing quiet moments with relatives who offered genuine warmth and support. My daughter, tired from the excitement, rested her head on my shoulder, her trust and love a silent reminder of everything I had fought for. I felt a sense of peace, a certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. Walking to the door, I paused. For a moment, looking back at the family gathered around the table, I realized that this night was not about proving anything to them or to him. It was about reclaiming my story, one choice at a time. And as I stepped out into the night, I knew I would never again let anyone else decide my worth. The car ride home was silent, broken only by the soft breathing of my daughter, asleep in her car seat. I drove through familiar streets, replaying the evening in my mind, feeling the weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. I realized that showing up at the dinner had been more than a test of courage. It was the moment I confronted the past and refused to let it dictate my future. Still, a part of me wondered if I had truly closed that chapter, or if something was still unfinished. The next morning, I woke before dawn, unable to shake the feeling that something inside me was shifting. I moved through the apartment quietly, making coffee, checking on my daughter, listening to the ordinary sounds of a new day. There was a calmness in the routine, a comfort in knowing that I had survived another milestone. But beneath that calm was a restless energy, a sense that the hardest conversation was still ahead. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, considering the invitation. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward without looking back. But another part knew that real closure would only come if I faced him honestly, without fear or anger. I agreed to meet, choosing a public place where I felt safe and in control. We sat across from each other at a small cafe, the noise of other conversations providing a buffer. He looked tired, older than I remembered, his confidence replaced by something softer. "I know I hurt you," he began, voice low. "I've spent months trying to find the words, but nothing seems enough." I listened, letting him speak, not interrupting or offering comfort. For the first time, I realized that his guilt was his to carry, not mine to heal. When he finished, I took a breath and spoke. "You broke something in me that night, not just trust, but the belief that I mattered. I spent months rebuilding myself, not for you, but for our daughter and for me. I don't need your forgiveness or your regret. I needed to become someone who could look in the mirror and see strength, not just survival." My voice was steady, the words coming from a place of clarity I hadn't known I possessed. He nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I see that now. I'm sorry for everything." I accepted his apology, not because it changed the past, but because I refused to let anger define my future. We talked about our daughter, about co-parenting, about the boundaries I needed to protect my peace. The conversation was hard, but it was honest. When we parted, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I had carried alone for too long. That night, I sat by my daughter's crib, watching her sleep. I thought about the woman I had become, the journey from heartbreak to healing. I realized that closure didn't come from someone else's words or actions. It came from choosing, every day, to let go of what I couldn't change and to hold on to what mattered: my self-worth, my resilience, my hope for the future. The next day, I called my sister, sharing the details of the conversation. She listened, offering support without judgment. "You sound different," she said. "Lighter." I smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. I was lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because I had stopped letting it define me. As the week went on, I noticed small changes in myself. I laughed more easily, found joy in simple moments, made plans for the future without fear. The family dinner had been a turning point, but this quiet, steady acceptance was the real transformation. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone unrecognizable even to myself. For the first time since that night in the hospital, I felt free, not just from him, but from the story I thought I had to live. I was writing my own story now, one choice at a time. And I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. I never imagined that the journey would end with a quiet morning, sunlight filtering through the window as my daughter played on the living room floor. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic confrontation, just a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. The family dinner, the difficult conversations, the months of rebuilding, they all led to this moment where I could breathe without the weight of the past pressing down on my chest. It became clear that transformation didn't come in a single, sweeping moment. It was built day by day, in small choices and silent victories. I watched my daughter giggle, her innocence untouched by the storms we had weathered together. I realized that my strength was not measured by how well I hid my pain, but by how openly I embraced the future, scars and all. The days that followed were filled with new routines. I went back to work, balancing motherhood with ambition. I reached out to old friends, reconnecting with parts of myself I thought I had lost. Each conversation, each step forward, was a reminder that I was not defined by betrayal, but by resilience. My world expanded beyond the confines of what had happened to me, and I found joy in places I once overlooked. There were setbacks, moments when doubt crept in, whispering that maybe I wasn't as strong as I wanted to be. But I refused to let those thoughts take root. I leaned on my support system: my sister, my friends, even my daughter's laughter, drawing strength from the love that surrounded me. Healing was not a straight line, but I moved forward with intention, choosing hope over fear. One afternoon, as I watched my daughter take her first steps, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the past. She looked up at me, her eyes bright with possibility, and I saw in her the reflection of the woman I had become. I was no longer the person who had been broken in a hospital room. I was someone who had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, stronger than before. The family reached out more often, inviting us to gatherings, treating me not as a victim, but as a valued member of their world. There were still awkward moments, reminders of what had been lost, but they no longer defined the present. I learned to accept kindness without suspicion, to let go of the need to prove myself. The dinner that once loomed as a test of strength became just another memory, a turning point on a much longer road. My relationship with my ex settled into something manageable, focused on co-parenting and respect. We were no longer partners, but we were allies in raising our daughter. There were still wounds, but they no longer bled. The apologies had been given, the boundaries drawn, and I found myself able to wish him well without bitterness. Forgiveness, I discovered, was not about excusing the past, but about freeing myself from it. As the months passed, I noticed that people began to comment on the change in me. They saw the confidence, the ease with which I moved through the world. Some asked for advice, others simply offered quiet support. I realized that my story had become more than a tale of betrayal. It was a testament to what could be rebuilt from the ashes. I was not unrecognizable because of how I looked, but because of how I lived. The final lesson came quietly, in the ordinary moments that filled my days. I learned that happiness was not a destination, but a practice. It was found in the laughter of my child, the warmth of a friend's embrace, the satisfaction of a day well spent. I stopped waiting for life to return to what it had been, and instead embraced what it could become. Looking back, I understood that the pain had shaped me, but it did not define me. I had faced the worst and emerged not just intact, but transformed. The woman who walked into that family dinner was not the same as the one who left. She was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. As I tucked my daughter into bed that night, her small hand wrapped around my finger, I whispered a promise not just to her, but to myself. We would keep moving forward together no matter what. The story was no longer about what had been lost, but about everything we had found. And that, I realized, was the real beginning.